I didn't see her again for 3 days. And then, of course, she appeared in the hallway of my building, holding a stack of folders that looked heavier than they probably were. She paused when she saw me, eyebrows lifting, a faint crease appearing between them that I wanted to smooth away with nothing more than a touch. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice carried that stupid nervousness she seemed to enjoy exposing. "Hey," she replied, shifting the weight of the folders from one hand to the other. Her coat felt open slightly, revealing a soft cashmere sweater, the kind that made you want to trace the line of her collarbone without saying it. I reminded myself to breathe. Thought I could help," I said, gesturing at the folders. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that seemed to weigh meaning into every millimeter of her lips. Sure," she said, and we walked side by side down the narrow hallway. Her fingers brushed mine when she reached for a door handle, and for a second, neither of us pulled away. I wanted to memorize the warmth of her hand against mine, the quiet pulse that somehow echoed everything I hadn't said. We reached the small office where she worked, and she sighed, a low sound that felt like admission without words. Papers were scattered across her desk, some marked with coffee stains, others with handwriting that looked hurried, almost frantic. "Sorry," she murmured, looking down. "I'm usually more organized." "You don't have to apologize," I said, though my throat felt tight. There was something fragile in that pause, something I couldn't name, and yet it called me closer. She looked up, her eyes catching mine for the briefest fraction of a second, and I caught the shift, a flicker of fatigue, of loneliness, maybe even the remnants of heartbreak she hadn't fully walked away from. Her lips parted slightly, not in a smile, not in a question, just a quiet opening that invited me in without saying a word. I started stacking folders, careful not to brush her fingers again, careful not to give away that my entire focus had drifted to her. I noticed the small details I shouldn't. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint scent of jasmine that lingered after she moved past me, the slight tremor in her hands when she lifted a heavier folder. "This one's tricky," she said, leaning over the desk and letting her hand rest near mine. The proximity made my chest tighten. "I think I'll need a little extra help." I nodded, but I didn't move away. I wanted to ask her to stay, to let this moment stretch a second longer than it should. My voice almost found the courage, almost formed the words I knew I shouldn't speak, but then she looked at me with that quiet, unreadable expression and whispered, "Thanks for staying." And that was it. A touch of her hand on the edge of my arm, a brief tilt of her head toward me, a look that said more than words could manage. I stayed. I couldn't leave. And already, I knew the line between help and desire had blurred in ways neither of us were ready to admit. The office was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the heater and the soft tapping of rain against the window. She leaned over the desk, balancing the last stack of folders, and I felt that familiar pull in my chest, the one that made it impossible to look away without pretending I wasn't already caught. "I don't usually ask for help with this," she said, voice low, almost hesitant. I watched her fingers trace the edge of a folder, nails tapping ever so slightly. Something about the way she admitted that vulnerability made me want to step closer, to reach out, to offer something more than just assistance. I started sorting papers, trying not to let my hand linger too close to hers, trying not to notice the faint tremor in her wrist when she lifted a heavier folder. But my eyes betrayed me. I watched the way she sighed when a page slipped, the curve of her shoulder, as she leaned forward, and the almost imperceptible bite of her lip when she realized she'd made another error. I'm sorry," she murmured, not at me, but almost as if the apology was for herself. The soft murmur was enough to make me lose track of everything but her, and I found myself saying, "It's okay. Really, I've got it." Her eyes met mine, not with expectation, not with anything I could name, but with something raw, an unspoken acknowledgement of what neither of us dared voice. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her that staying here, helping her, that this, whatever this was the only part of the day that made sense. But I didn't. I swallowed it down like always. Then she leaned just a little too close over the desk, and our shoulders brushed. I could feel the warmth of her coat against mine. My fingers twitched, as if wanting to reach for her hand, to steady it, or maybe to just feel it. But I didn't. I told myself it was enough to breathe in the same space. The moment stretched, delicate and heavy, until a sudden buzz shattered it. Her phone on the desk, vibrating like it had been waiting for this exact second. She jumped slightly, startled, and the spell broke. I stepped back, almost embarrassed at how close I had let myself get. She picked up the phone, her hand brushing mine again in passing. This time, I didn't move away. "I need to take this," she said, her voice careful, measured. But she didn't immediately step aside, and her gaze lingered on me, a fraction too long, a silent question I wasn't supposed to answer. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make this pause last just a moment longer. To let her know that I could have, should have, and maybe already did care too much. My lips parted, almost forming words that I knew would cross a line we both weren't ready for. The door creaked behind us. Neither of us heard it until a shadow fell across the threshold, a reminder that the world outside this tiny room existed in that hour. Moment, delicate, fragile, dangerously close to breaking, wasn't meant to stay unobserved. She looked at me, breath catching just slightly. My heart thudded, and I realized that if I moved closer now, I might not be able to stop. The tension hung there, thick and suffocating, as the light from the rain-streaked window caught in her hair. And just like that, the line between right and forbidden blurred, leaving us both on the edge of something we could never take back. The office felt smaller than usual, the air thick with the scent of coffee and rain lingering from the window she hadn't closed properly. She was sitting on the edge of her desk, legs crossed, folders splayed around her like a small fortress. I stayed standing, hands shoved deep into my pockets, trying not to show that every nerve in my body was tuned to her. "I don't usually let anyone in here," she said quietly, almost to herself. But her eyes didn't leave mine. They were sharp, searching, and I felt like a trespasser, even as every instinct told me I belonged there. I just wanted to help," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. I wanted to tell her everything, to strip down the careful distance we'd both maintained. Instead, I let my gaze wander over her, memorizing the subtle shifts. The way her hair fell against her shoulder, the tense line of her jaw, the faint tremor when she reached for another folder. She noticed me noticing. I could see it in the micro-expression that flashed across her face, part amusement, part fear, part longing. And then, as if deciding she'd had enough of pretense, she leaned forward, letting her hand brush against mine while she sorted the papers. The touch was fleeting, accidental, or maybe not. My fingers itched to linger, but I didn't. "I'm tired," she admitted suddenly, voice low, almost a whisper. "Tired of pretending I can manage everything alone." She didn't look away. "I like it, having someone here who notices. Who doesn't just pass me by? Like I'm invisible." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to step closer, to tell her that I had noticed every small detail. The tremor in her hand, the way she bit her lip when she thought no one was watching, the quiet sighs that punctuated her day. But restraint held me back, though barely. "You don't have to do this alone," I managed to say, voice low. And then I froze, realizing I'd crossed some invisible boundary just by speaking, by letting her hear the truth in my tone. Her eyes softened, a flicker of something I couldn't name passing through them. She leaned a fraction closer, and I could feel her warmth, the faint scent of jasmine mixing with the rain-soaked air. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming that the line between right and forbidden was razor-thin. She started, stopped. Her gaze locked on mine, and the world outside the office ceased to exist. "I don't want this to mean more than it should," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her. "I can't not feel something when you're here." The words hung between us, impossible to take back, dangerous in their honesty. I wanted to respond, to tell her that I felt the same, that every glance, every accidental brush of our hands had already said it for me. But the weight of everything, consequence, reason, reality, kept my lips sealed. So I just stood there, and she just sat, silence stretched, thick and electric, and I realized that in that moment, we were both holding our breath, waiting, wondering if the next move would shatter everything or finally cross the line neither of us could deny. And then she asked, almost impossibly softly, "Do you want to stay a little longer?" The office door clicked behind me as I stepped inside, expecting the quiet familiarity of scattered folders and the faint hum of the heater. She was there, perched on the edge of her desk, legs swinging slightly, the same anxious tension I had come to recognize in her posture. But something was different. The curve of her lips, the way her eyes darted toward the phone on the corner of the desk, betrayed a knowledge I didn't yet have. Before I could speak, she straightened abruptly. You know him?" Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. I froze. My mind scrambled. Him? I followed her gaze to the framed photograph on her desk. A younger man with an easy smile, clearly someone she had once known, maybe loved. And then it hit me, slowly, stomach twisting. She had been talking about someone else the whole time. Someone married, someone impossible. I stammered, unsure if I should explain, deny, or retreat. My chest felt tight, like every beat was counting down to a revelation I couldn't stop. She rose, pacing the small office, her hands tangling in her hair. I thought I could leave it behind. I thought I could. Her words faltered, and the raw edge in her voice cut through me. She turned to face me, eyes glistening, and for the first time, I saw unfiltered fear. Not of me, but of what she had allowed herself to feel. I'm not over it, she admitted, almost too quietly. Not him. Not completely. But then, you happened. And now, she stopped, gaze dropping. I don't know what I'm doing. I wanted to reach for her hand, to ground her somehow, but the shock had lodged in my throat. Every instinct screamed that I should step back, that this wasn't my fight, that this was something tangled and far older than our brief, charged moments together. Yet my heart betrayed me, racing toward her, toward the warmth I had come to crave. I don't care about him, I said finally, voice low but steady. I'm not him, and I don't want to be, but I can't just walk away either. Her lips parted, startled, as if my words were both a relief and another complication she hadn't prepared for. She swallowed hard, and I saw the momentary flash of panic, then longing, flicker across her features. I can't do this, she said, shaking her head. But her hand lingered near mine on the desk. The hesitation was everything. The single moment that said more than any confession ever could. I stepped closer, careful to give her the choice, careful not to push too far. Then, tell me what you want, I whispered. Don't tell me what you think you should want. Tell me what you feel. Her gaze met mine, raw and unguarded. And in that instant, I realized that the fragile tension between us had shifted, no longer just playful or forbidden. It was a reckoning, a fork in the road where nothing could remain the same. She swallowed again, words caught between desire and fear, and asked, trembling, "Do you really want this?" The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of wet concrete and earth, drifting through the half-open window. I stayed by the desk, watching her shift uneasily, hands pressed to her lap, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room, somewhere she wasn't ready to confront. I can't pretend anymore, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. My chest tightened. I'd been waiting to hear it, dreading it, knowing that when the dam broke, everything would change. Her gaze found mine, unflinching now, and I saw the weight she'd carried all these days. Fear, longing, uncertainty. I wanted this to be simple, she admitted. I wanted it to be nothing. But it isn't. And she stopped, a tremor running through her shoulders, and I stepped closer instinctively, as if closing the physical distance might somehow ease the emotional one. You don't have to explain, I said, voice low, almost hoarse. Just tell me what you feel. She swallowed, and I saw the internal battle flicker across her face, the part of her clinging to reason, and the part that had already given in to what she could no longer deny. Then, she did something I hadn't dared hope for. She reached for my hand. Not a fleeting brush, not a hesitant touch. She pressed her palm into mine, warm and certain. I feel this, she whispered. Even if I shouldn't. Even if it's forbidden. Even if it scares me. And that was all I needed. All the restraint I had tried to cling to melted away, replaced by something raw and unpolished, a surge of want and care that refused to wait for permission. I covered her hand with both of mine, careful, gentle, yet unyielding. I feel it too. I confessed, the words rough but sincere. Every second, every glance. I can't pretend it doesn't exist. She let out a shuddering breath, and suddenly the room felt too small for all the unspoken words, too small for the pull between us. Yet, in that moment, there was clarity. No games, no hesitation, just truth laid bare. I don't know what comes next, she admitted, voice breaking. But I want to try. Even if it's messy, even if it's wrong. I nodded, leaning closer, careful to respect the fragile line between us. Messy is okay, I said, almost smiling, though my heart hammered in my chest. As long as it's real. And in that shared acknowledgement, the world outside ceased to matter. Every careful rule, every whispered doubt, every hesitation, they were just echoes now. The choice had been made, imperfect and human, and yet it felt undeniably ours. She squeezed my hand once, firmly, and let go, leaning back against the desk, eyes locked on mine. I mirrored her motion, both of us suspended between exhilaration and fear, knowing that whatever came next, neither of us would remain unchanged. Then, almost inaudibly, she asked, "Promise me we won't let this break us?" I held her gaze, unflinching, and said what I had been thinking from the very first brush of fingers, the first accidental glance. "We'll figure it out. Together." The room fell silent, but it wasn't emptiness. It was the quiet after a storm, charged, alive, and impossible to forget. The office felt quieter than usual that morning, sunlight spilling across the scattered folders like it had permission to enter. She was already there when I arrived, cup of coffee in hand, eyes scanning something on her laptop. For a brief moment, I hesitated at the doorway, remembering the storm, the brushes of fingers, the words we had finally spoken. She looked up, smiled, and for the first time, it was entirely unguarded. The tension, the fear, and the caution replaced by something soft, human, and steady. "Morning," she said, and it was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its simplicity. I stepped in, carrying my own mug, and let my gaze linger on her just a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't reckless. It was recognition of the connection that had taken shape, fragile and messy, and yet real. We settled into a quiet rhythm, sorting papers, sharing a few private smiles. The air between us was lighter now, though the memory of our near misses, the unspoken hesitations, the sharp edges of desire still lingered. But it didn't scare us anymore. It didn't need to. "I never thought," she began, pausing mid-sentence, and I waited attentive. "I never thought someone could make me feel seen again. Fully, even when I'm chaotic." I nodded, words unnecessary. She understood what I meant. The same truth I had held close from the first accidental brush of hands to the first confession in the storm-soaked office. We had both stepped into something that terrified us, and somehow, it had made us braver. "Do you think?" I started, unsure if I wanted to finish the thought. But she met my gaze, encouraging yet patient. "Do you think we'll be okay?" She smiled, a small, knowing tilt of her lips. "Messy, imperfect, yes. But yes." And in that quiet affirmation, I realized what we had both gained. Not perfection, not easy answers, but the courage to admit feelings we had spent far too long hiding. The courage to act despite fear, despite uncertainty. To be present, fully, for another person without reservation. I glanced at her hand resting lightly on the desk, and for a moment, I traced the memory of our first brush of fingers, how it had felt like the world paused to let something impossible bloom. And now, the impossibility had transformed into possibility, tentative yet real, delicate yet undeniable. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the kind that comes after stormy confessions, before the chaos of life intrudes again. And I understood, finally, that some connections don't just happen. They are earned, nurtured, and chosen, imperfectly, beautifully, and unapologetically human. She caught my gaze as I prepared to leave, her smile soft, knowing. "See you later," she said. I nodded, walking toward the door with a full heart, aware that whatever came next, whatever challenges remained, the moment we had shared had already changed us forever. Final takeaway. Love and connection are not perfect or immediate. They require risk, honesty, and the courage to step beyond fear. Even fleeting brushes, whispered words, and fragile moments can leave an indelible mark. Did you enjoy this story? What kinds of emotionally charged, slow-burn stories would you like to hear next?